Okay, so here's a big question. Could medical devices using really advanced AI, the kind like ChatGPT, actually get approved for use in hospitals or clinics?
And maybe even more importantly, who's actually the first to uh, set specific rules for that level of complex AI?
Right, that's exactly what we're diving into today. We're looking at some brand new guidelines specifically for approving these, well, cutting-edge AI models.
We're talking large language models, LLMs, and also these large multimodal models, LMMs, when they're used as medical devices.
And the source we're digging into is an editorial in the Korean Journal of Radiology.
It discusses the official guidelines that just came out from South Korea's Ministry of Food and Drug Safety, the MFDS.
And these are hot off the press, issued January 24th, 2025. So yeah, very recent. Let's unpack why this is such a big deal.
So basically, these South Korean guidelines are all about the approval process for generative AI in medical tech.
Generative AI, that's the broad term, right?
Yeah, but the guidelines really zoom in on models built using LLMs, which most people know from things like ChatGPT, and maybe more critically, these LMMs, large multimodal models.
Okay, LLMs handle text. We get that. But LMMs, what's the key difference there? Especially thinking about medicine.
Well, that's where it gets significantly more complex. LMMs can handle and integrate different kinds of data all at once.
So not just text.
Exactly. Imagine it processing doctor's notes, but also looking at x-rays or CT scans, maybe even video from a surgery, listening to audio recordings, or analyzing biosignals like an ECG.
Wow, pulling all that together.
Yeah, for a medical device, being able to synthesize all that information, it's incredibly powerful, potentially.
Okay, and here's where it gets really interesting, context-wise. We know countries like the US, the UK, they've been working on AI regulations for medical devices for a bit now.
They have, yeah. There are broader frameworks out there.
But this editorial argues that while those frameworks exist, they maybe haven't really put forward rules specifically for the unique way LLMs and especially LMMs work, their generative nature, the multimodal inputs.
That's the core argument, and this is where South Korea seems to be stepping out front.
Uh-huh.
By issuing these very specific guidelines, they look like they might be the first country to actually carve out a dedicated regulatory path just for these advanced generative AI models.
So charting new territory in regulation, basically. The editorial, it gives an overview, right? Hits the main points.
It does. It highlights the key features, but it also points out some areas the authors think might need more work or clarification down the line, which makes sense. The tech moves fast.
And it mentions the full guidelines are currently just in Korean, which is important to note.
Absolutely. And what's really fascinating is seeing regulators start to, well, grapple with AI that doesn't just analyze data points,
Right.
but can actually generate new text, new insights, maybe even images based on really complex mixed inputs.
And setting safety standards for that. I mean, models that can hallucinate or give unpredictable results sometimes, that's a whole different ballgame than traditional software.
It really is a fundamentally different challenge.
So bringing it back to the listener, why should you care about these Korean guidelines?
Well, it signals that regulators are finally getting serious about these very advanced AI systems, the ones that could be behind the next wave of medical tools you might interact with.
Yeah, these guidelines are basically the first stab at making sure these powerful new tools are not just innovative, but actually safe and effective for patients, for you.
It's a really significant step figuring out how to safely bring this complex AI into actual healthcare settings.
So the main takeaway, South Korea has taken a pioneering step, arguably the first specific regulatory pathway for LLMs and LMMs as medical devices.
Which leaves us with a pretty big question for the future, doesn't it? As these AI models just keep getting smarter and faster, how are regulators globally going to keep up? How do you balance encouraging innovation with making absolutely sure patients are safe? What new hurdles pop up as the tech gets even wilder?
Lots to think about there. And hey, if this whole topic of advanced generative AI in medicine has got you thinking, especially about what it can actually do right now in diagnosis, which is exactly the kind of capability these new regulations are trying to manage. You might want to check out our previous deep dive. It was on an article called Generative AI in Diagnosis. Impressive, but not expert level yet.
Yeah, that gives some good context on the current state of play for the technologies these guidelines are targeting.
Definitely worth a listen if you want to connect the dots.